Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today in what is the very last in a series of inspirational talks, which are part of the PlayUK Russia Games Industry Programme. This is an innovative programme designed to strengthen links between the British and Russian game sectors, delivered by the Cultural and Education section of the British Embassy in Moscow, the Universal University and Scream School in Moscow, as well as Ukie, the video games trade body here in the UK. My name's Louisa and I'm from Ukie. Please note that the interview will be in English, but there is a simultaneous interpretation in Russian. So to listen to the Russian version, you just need to click on the interpreter button at the bottom right of your screen and change the channel to Russian. So that's just at the bottom right of your screen, and you can change the channel to Russian there. Now, we do encourage you to ask questions to our speaker. And to do this, you just need to click on the Q&A at the bottom of the screen and simply type your questions in. And I will try to get to as many of those as possible throughout the interview. So just as a little introduction, the United Kingdom is a powerhouse in games development and publishing. And from the early days of bedroom coders through to the multinational studios of today, the UK has been at the forefront of games development for over 40 years. And at the heart of the games industry, not only in the UK, but around the world, are the incredible people that lead and inspire games development and publishing. So in this series of events, we've heard from 5 industry leaders from the UK games industry, and they've shared their stories, their passions, their successes, and their failures. And in many cases, they are legends of the industry, but all of them are still at the top of their game, creating amazing, enthralling experiences for players of today. So far, we've spoken to some amazing guests. We've had Peter Molyneux, Tim Woodley, Ian Livingston, Fiona Sperry, and all of these talks are currently available on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch those. But today, we are very happy to be welcoming Dr. David Reeves, who currently works on the board of Keyword Studios, which is a world-leading provider of technical services to the games industry. And always insightful with his advice, David is a games industry veteran with an amazing track record that includes serving as president and CEO for Sony Computer Entertainment EMEA and as COO for Capcom Europe. So David, thank you so much for agreeing to come and have a chat with us today. I wondered if we could start with, if you could just tell us about yourself and how you got into the games industry, and maybe just touch on some of your links with Russia.
Yes, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is indeed David Reeves, but I am probably the oldest contributor to this series of programs, but I have not been in the games industry all of my life, probably since about, in fact, from about 1995. So there are a lot of things like Tetris, which, especially from Russia, which predate me. I am a video gamer. I do play video games, but my background is, in fact, I'm an astrophysicist. I don't know whether many in the audience are also astrophysicists. I know there are a lot in Russia, but I would just give you a little bit about my background. I did science at university, and then I went on to do a PhD. And a lot of my PhD was to do with actually spacecraft and satellites, which is right in the sweet spot for Russians. I worked with NASA on the Apollo program for part of the time. And believe it or not, I even contributed to the Soyuz program. And what I worked on was something, and I think the interpreter may have a problem with this, it's called Photochromism. And what it means is that if you have glass or perspex, that if you shine light at it, it will go dark. When you take the light away, it will go clear. And some of you might know that some of the satellites and some of the spacecraft, including the Apollo and including Soyuz, had photochromic portholes. Not all of them, but some of them. And that's what I worked on. And that was my first really meeting with Russians, because we were allowed, I was doing basic research, and we were sharing these things together. So they were on both spacecraft. And as you know, later in Russia, that Tom Stafford and Leonov actually met in space after the Apollo program. So it's below the surface, it's all very friendly in science. So after that, of course, after Apollo 17, everything shut down, and I came back to the UK. And for my sins, I did marketing and not astrophysics, and I was recruited by a big famous tobacco company called John Players in the UK, which was then bought by a big American company. And for the next 17 years, I went around the world, South Africa, Germany, Japan, USA, Switzerland, actually really marketing cigarettes through Formula One, Camel Trophy, all sorts of things. But my link with Russia, and I'll start, if you don't mind, Louisa, with an anecdote, is that I was based in Geneva. And part of my remit as a marketing person, not yet even playing video games, was that I had to sell cigarettes to Russia. And the way we did it was it was totally legal, and it was a process called Switch. Now, it's not Nintendo Switch, but it's an official way that you actually sell these type of goods, cigarettes, to Russians in those days. This was in early 80s, 1981. And the way we did it was that I used to go up with my boss to Helsinki, and we met 5 or 6 Russians in a bear meat restaurant in Helsinki, including one KGB person. And we used to sell Winston and Camel cigarettes to the Russians. And since I worked for a company called Argiana Bisco, we also produced vodka, and we produced that vodka in France. And we needed plums, we needed potatoes. So I used to do deals with the Russian people that came over to Helsinki, and it was about 14 containers of potatoes, 1 container of cigarettes. And I have to say, it was a very pleasant experience. I have some memories of it, but of course, when you have too much vodka, you tend to have not too many memories. So that's what it was, either no memories or good memories. And that's the first time. And it was a very successful business. It went on for 3 or 4 years. That wasn't all that I did. But then I also managed to get sewing machines and all sorts of things in exchange for cigarettes. And they were sold in Russia in valuta stores. I think sometimes you call them Beryoska. I think our translator, or it was like it was in the 1930s in Russian. I think it was called Polksin. I don't know if our interpreter is aware of that expression, but that was a long time ago, and that's how goods were sold to the Russians. So I had 17 years with this company, and I ended up in Japan, and I got to know some of the people in Sony. And because I spoke French and German and Japanese as well as English, they recruited me for PlayStation in February 1995. And I was appointed as the managing director for Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. And that's what I set up in Frankfurt. There was a small office there, and we decided not to go with Sony hardware, the TVs and things like that. We set up our own business. And so I launched, if you like, PlayStation in September 1995 in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. And that's how I was introduced to gaming. I was there for 4 or 5 years. PlayStation 1 became quite successful. And eventually I moved back to London in the head office for PlayStation. And my CFO at the time was actually the president of PlayStation now, Jim Ryan. And we decided, part of our strategic plan for PlayStation, that we would try and put PlayStation into markets where really gaming existed, but we thought that they should be introduced to PlayStation. So the markets were places like India, the Middle East, Poland, and Russia. And we actually opened a PlayStation office in Russia, and that's how it all started. Of course, Louise is going to ask me the question in a moment. But David, wasn't it all pirates? And if you want to ask that question, I can tell you how we converted the pirates.
I mean, well, this is the thing. I mean, obviously you've it almost feels, I mean, it's not entirely full circle, but it is interesting that you're moving from one slightly unconventional deal to another of kind of creating new relationships and new connections. And yeah, especially with Russia's kind of history as a pirate market. And I was definitely interested in hearing about how Russia developed from this pirate market. From, you know, as you say, February 1995, you kind of come into Europe with PlayStation. And yeah, just interested in hearing about how Russia grew from there.
Well, of course, Russia has a lot of history of video games, largely PC, but everybody, of course, has heard of Tetris and Alexei Pajitnov, if that's the right way to say it, you know, from the 1980s. And originally, there were quite a few companies in Russia. Nival, for example, IC were there. They still are. And a lot of the games that developed, which became famous, like were based on Battle of Stalingrad, for example, IL-2, Stormovik, The Truth About Ninth Company. And these became very, very famous games. But it was largely PC, and the PlayStations were something different. But we found, believe it or not, that the games were selling in, particularly in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but they were pirated games. And the Russians in the audience will know that most of the games in Russia were sold on what is called the markets. And they are indeed markets. They are stalls which are laid out, and they're selling all sorts of games in discs. And we heard from our distributor, some of you may have heard of this, it's called Soft Club. They're now owned by 1C in Moscow. And the managing director was a very famous person called Dmitry Martinov. And he called us up in London one day and said, David, you know, they're selling a lot of PlayStation 1 games, but he said, I'm not selling them. They're all pirated. And he said, I have a plan. If you come to Moscow, to try and make sure that these are not pirated. And he said, the plan is that I want to introduce you to these pirates, the people who are making the games. And well, that's what we did. We went there and we met 3 of the principal pirating organizations. And what they were doing was they were essentially just taking the PlayStation 1s and they were chipping them. And by chipping them, it meant that they could pay pirate discs. And this chip is like a spider. It's of wires. And they were being done in the shops in largely Moscow and St. Petersburg. So you had to have a chip PlayStation. But the games themselves were CDs, and they were called, what they called them was box and docs. So what you had was, the Russians had produced the PlayStation 1 documents in Russian. They produced the pirate disc, and it would play on the PlayStation 1. Now, this didn't help Sony very much. So what we said to them was, and I'll come to the point, Louisa, so it shows you actually how really flexible Russians can be, is that they were selling these in the market at $5. And we said, well, look, I tell you what, if we sell them to you at $7, you can sell them at $10, but we will give you the official discs, and that you won't have to chip the PlayStations. And that's really what we did. And so we did a deal, and over a 3-year period, most of the pirates converted to official PlayStation 1s. And it really worked out very well for us. And we did a similar thing in Italy, because Italy became a big PlayStation market, largely because of the piracy, which was south of Rome. So, Louisa, that's how we managed to convert the pirates. Of course, there are still people there trying to pirate the discs.
Yeah,
But,
I guess my so was it the PlayStations were being bought from Sony, and then it was the games that were essentially being copied,
yeah,
or
the PlayStation 1s were being bought and imported,
right,
through Sony, but they had to be chipped to play the Russian pirated discs.
got it.
Actually, strangely enough, the pirated discs were made in Poland, not actually in Russia to start with, because the Poles found the easy way to do it, and then did the box and docks for the Russians. But you didn't then need to later to chip the PlayStation, because we made sure that the discs that we gave them, the official ones, couldn't come back, because no one else in the world, as far as we knew, wanted to play it in Russian. So they stayed in Russia.
That makes a lot of sense.
Louisa. So it was like going to Helsinki to switch Winston cigarettes for potatoes. This time it was slightly different, but of a similar nature.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned earlier that obviously PlayStation with that kind of deal became a more significant player kind of in the Russian market. But you did mention before that prior to that, and kind of still today, PC is extremely popular. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit more just about the current profile of the Russian games market, and
Yes.
where those sorts of the current profile kind of comes from.
Well, of course, Russia is very well known for strategy games. The best, I guess there are people in other parts of the world who would argue this, but the best chess players probably come from Russia, and that's a strategy game. It's not the only strategy game, but a lot of the games that were developed early, as I mentioned, Battle of Stalingrad and things like that. Some of the games that came out, like Space Rangers, Silent Storm, King's Bounty, War Thunder, and then later, of course, not necessarily developed in Russia, but World of Tanks, World of Warcraft. These are all classic strategy games, and the Russian developers have been past masters, and they still are masters at developing those type of games. And I have to say that probably they are the best. And the code that they produce, the way it's written, is so clean that the problem with when British coders write something, it's rather like my hard disk. It's just full, and I have to defragment. But the way that Russian developers actually develop it, they're very, very good at making sure that we put that in that corner of the hard disk, that in that corner. And then when it comes to play, it gets to 50 frames per second or 60 frames per second. Whereas, I probably shouldn't say this live, but when we looked at Rockstar, who were doing GTA, we always had to defragment and to optimize the game to prevent it being on 9 or 10 discs, whereas the Russians still are, and were then, very, very good at developing those type of games in a very, very precise way.
I mean, the strategy and military element is definitely really interesting. And from kind of more of a player perspective, do you know much of what the demographics of of the people making and playing these games are at the moment in Russia?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about the Russian market at the moment. Is that in 2020, and to some extent now in 2021, largely because of the pandemic, but also because Russians love digital, in 2019, the market grew almost 14%. And then in 2021, right now, it's growing about 35%. So it's absolutely massive. And it's divided essentially into three parts. The first part is PC, which traditionally is very big, but it is 99% now digital. So it's just downloaded, and that's worth about 78, 79 billion rubles, not dollars, rubles, yeah? If you wanted the exchange rate, it's 0.014 for US dollars, but it's 78 billion for PC. The next biggest, and this has come about in the last 5 to 6 years, is essentially mobile. Mobile is now probably 74 billion rubles, and as you can see, makes up a huge proportion of the market. And there are so many developers now in Russia, as there are in China and all over the world, India as well, making just free-to-play games, mobile games. The third part of the profile is what we call consoles. So that's PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch. And that, I would say, is probably between 14 and 15 billion rubles. So essentially, you get between 165 and 170 billion rubles for 2021. And that is really quite a big market. There are in Russia probably 65 to 70 million gamers. That is the biggest, and if we can call Russia in Europe, I know some people don't like to say it is separate, but if you include Russia in Europe, it is by far the biggest number of gamers are actually in Russia. On PC, the third most popular language worldwide is Russian. You can probably guess what the first two are. They are, of course, Chinese and English, but Russian is, in fact, number 3. Now, in 2022, of course, because COVID accelerated that game business, because people were essentially at home for a lot of the time, and it happened everywhere. So the gaming industry went up 2020, 21, and I think in 2022, it will stabilize, but after that, it will start to go up again. So Russia is in the sweet spot at the moment for development in video games. They've got PC, they've got mobile, or free to play, and they've got consoles as well. And even Nintendo, I believe, have an office now in Russia because Nintendo Switch has been so successful.
Yeah.
I talked a little bit about the profile, Louisa, and in mobile, 45%, I'm told, of the gamers on mobile are actually female. There's no reason why females shouldn't play games, but when I went there in 1997, 1998, it was probably 90% male, and they were playing on PC. So you've seen this big change, the big change to mobile and the big change in terms of the socio-demographic profile, much younger and much more female.
And I mean, obviously, it's often quite limited to speculate on causation and correlation. But do you have any idea as to where that growth has come from?
I think that, as in many markets, that the spread of the genre has been massive. It's gone from strategy games into, I don't know, Parappa the Rapper, and in Nintendo Switch into Zelda, Animal Crossing. But at the same time, special editions have been made for Russia. So for example, for Mortal Kombat, the Russians in the audience will know that I think it was Warner Brothers did a special edition of Mortal Kombat 2, and it was a smash hit. And not only was it a smash hit, but then suddenly all the games in Russia, and this never happened before, were in Russian. Before, let's say, late 90s, it was what we call EFIGs. So English, French, Italian, German, Spanish, and then Japanese. But so both Sony and Microsoft, and now Nintendo, insist that the games are localized. So you asked Louisa, to answer your question, why did it grow? Largely because the games were, they had a softer genre, they expanded the genre, and they expanded the degree to which all the games were localized. And that had a massive, massive effect. I think the other thing was social, in that, as you probably know, Louisa, that in Germany, people really didn't like video games. It wasn't an industry to be in the late 90s. And it was the same in Russia. But now it is absolutely legitimate to be in the video game industry in Russia. And it is actually booming, but booming in a different way from it is in the UK.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, so that does bring me on to my next question, which is that in the UK, we have clusters of developers known as games hubs. So, for example, a lot of developers are based in London, but we also have Guildford and Leamington Spa, and then further up in Scotland, we have Dundee. So I wondered, where are games developers based in Russia, and how does that affect their output?
Yeah, in Russia, there are hubs. So Moscow, St. Petersburg, Volgograd have games hubs. But in the UK, these hubs developed from existing games companies or from universities. So for example, Leamington Spa, which maybe some of your Russian audience may not know, it's just by Birmingham. It was around there, was the home of Codemasters, you know, who used to do McRae, and they later did Formula One. But what did they have there? They had an existing company. Brighton had Electric Square and others. Guildford in the UK, for those that know it, was Media Molecule and Criterion. And there's, as you mentioned, Dundee and the north of England, of course, Rockstar were up there, and Abertay University were very, very progressive. But the big difference was, to make a video game, it's not just about the development and the code. It's about the ecosystem that goes round that video game industry. So what you need is, you need to do a voiceover. So you need a studio. You need to have localization. You need to have testing. You need to have artwork. So that ecosystem existed in Leamington Spa and Guildford and Brighton and Plymouth and Dundee. To start with, in Russia, that has not really developed. The Russians, from my mind, and I work now for a company that, if you like, makes games for bigger companies. It's called Work for Hire, WFH. So, for example, Sperasoft in St. Petersburg work for, it's well known, they work for Ubisoft on Assassin's Creed. But what they do is, they have that ecosystem, but their principal strength is that they are still the best coders. It is clean code, they do it quickly, they do it efficiently. What the some hubs in Russia do not have is that complete ecosystem of having a recording studio or having someone who can immediately do the localization into Italian or Chinese or English, yes, but you need to do it in Indian dialects, Indonesian now. Warner Brothers did Harry Potter in 57 languages. And that's why it became a big hit. So the hubs tend at the moment to be work for hire. They need to expand that ecosystem. Some have already. They need to expand that ecosystem so it's more like the film industry than the video game industry. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What else do you think the developer communities in the UK and Russia can learn from each other?
Yeah, I think that you're probably going to ask me, what can the Russian learn? And on the development, very little, because they are definitely one of the best at being able to develop, as I said before, develop the games efficiently. But what they are probably not so good at, and I guess people in the audience would argue with me on this, is developing a new IP, a new intellectual property. There had been some, as I mentioned, Space Rangers and Silent Storm and things like that have been, very well received, and there are some big companies in Russia developing it. But the concentration is on work for hire. The concentration is not on developing an IP that they can do globally, like Tetris.
Right. So just for maybe some of our audience members who don't know what that means, what would you you gave Tetris an example. What would you describe as an IP that's, what would you describe as an IP?
Well, I think that Russia is steeped in culture, the literature, and I think that some games they could take a leaf out of the book of Netflix, so that they could actually do almost like a drama and take something, and it has been done in some Russian video game studios, but develop that IP and do a game and maybe a film at the same time, and then market it, because you're going to make some money from making Assassin's Creed for Ubisoft, but we say where the honey is and where the money is essentially making a hit of your own. There have been some hits, of course there have.
This is the creation of franchises, essentially, of being able to.
Yes, you are absolutely right, Louisa. You're expressing it better than I am. You need to have a franchise that is a hit, and then do a sequel. Doesn't have to be Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed, and it doesn't have to be FIFA. But you can build these IPs. You could also build, as the Russians are starting now with esports, you could develop definitely IPs within esports for ice hockey or any other sport that was good in Russia, but you could export. It could be soccer, for example. But the Russians, to be able to, what they could learn from the Brits and the Americans is developing these IPs and these franchises, because the games that come out, they will go through the first party testing very, very quickly. There's no problem with the code, but they need to have a kind of, I say, an adjacent film industry, if I could put it that way, to be able to develop these, and then they need to be able to market it.
That makes sense. So I just have a question from the audience here.
Yeah.
From Anna Wagner. So just kind of as you're saying about the Russian games industry taking a leaf out of Netflix, and as you say, of having a almost an adjacent or maybe less an adjacent film industry, but more things that go hand in hand in the creation of these franchises. So Anna Wagner has said, don't you think that with the popularity of Netflix, you can lose the uniqueness of a game project? So I interpret that as meaning, you know, is there an element of losing the artistry when you try to build things on such a grand scale?
There have been some failures, and there have been some successes. I give you some examples. Final Fantasy was semi-successful. Resident Evil, or what's it called, Biohazard in Japan, yes. But why do you think, I would say to Anna, why do you think Netflix is going the other way into gaming? Because it is the fact that actually gaming is less predictable, it's less linear, and it's actually more exciting than just watching the film. You can play you know, a video game for 4 hours, 12 hours in some cases, but you see the film and that's it. And I think that if we talk about the metaverse, that I think that the combination of film and video games together, I do think is, in the past, it hasn't always been perfect, but I do think that some people are definitely going to get it right.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I wanted to dial back ever so slightly to what we were talking about with, as we say, with the creation of these franchises. What needs to be put in place, or what changes need to be made to build the existing market? Because obviously, as you say, there's a real strength in these as you say, these fantastic developers. What needs to be done to build the market?
Well, the model for developers in the UK, and to some extent in the USA as well, is that developers, they start by doing work for hire. So they are hired guns because they are good. And they develop, they get some income. In parallel, though, what a lot of studios do in the UK is that they develop their own franchise with the money that they make from being work for hire. So they put some money aside and they try and develop their own games. Now, some Russian studios are doing that, but not many. But that's what they need to do. They need to make that transition. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that, and I can't tell the Russian government to do this, but there needs to be some tax break for the video game industry, such that in the early days, the investment is worth it. And I can give them two models to work from. The first model is that there is a huge ecosystem of gaming in Quebec, particularly Montreal, but also to some extent in Ottawa. Two things happen. One is that the Quebec government have something called MMTC. It's a tax break for developers or companies like Ubisoft or Warner Brothers or EA who set up in Montreal, and keywords are there as well. And that infrastructure means that they get a break in the tax or the development costs from the Quebec government. And this is seeding, gives the studios the possibility to seed their own franchises and their own IPs, Louisa. The other model is that the French government do something similar, and the UK government, obviously, you know, they have the video game tax relief. And that is what needs to happen. It can't all come from investors. It has to come from the government, because the video game industry will not only spawn, or spawn is a difficult word, it will not only develop people who are coding, but it will develop people who are storytellers, who are comedians, even, Louisa, who are doing voiceovers, becoming famous for doing that. And where you see the new game hubs from Abu Dhabi or Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, it's because the government have put some money in to actually help. I know it's capitalism, but it works. And young developers out of university in computer science, it means that they don't have to go to their aunt and uncles and say, "Can you give me 10 million rubles?"
Yes.
You know, to develop a game.
Well, I mean, so quite a lot of what we do at Ukie is kind of championing the games industry in front of policymakers, right? We have a whole policy wing of our that's one of the main benefits of a national trade body. But I mean, you did mention young developers, university graduates, and I know that a lot of our audience might be looking for a first job in games in Russia or around the world. So what would be your advice in terms of starting out for university and college students to consider?
I would say that there's 4 or 5 things that they can do. One is attend a boot camp. I don't know if the translator knows what a boot camp is, but it's a place where you go. Normally, it's for soccer players or for skiers and things like that.
Yeah, it's quite colloquial.
But there's a boot camp also for video game developers. And Sperasoft in St. Petersburg operate a boot camp, and there are, I can think of 10 or 11 other places in Russia where there are boot camps. And what it does is it takes you into a world of the video gamers, and that you learn so much more. It's not academic. It's not, can I develop the right language, whether it's Python or Unity or C++. You learn the shortcuts, and there are some development companies in Russia that will give them that chance. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that if they have the possibility, then try to do an MSc course in the United States or Canada or New Zealand or Australia or the UK, because they will learn then not only pick up English, which is actually very important, but they will see the breadth of video games, and not just, and I'm not saying it's just chess or strategy, but they will see what you can do with video games in the modern age. So I would say try to spend 3 or 4 months, or if it's a full course, 10 to 11 months in one of the universities that offers computer science and a video gaming specialist. I would say the third thing is that there's a lot of money in the world for video gaming, and the money is burning in their hands to give to these young developers to be able to make a game. So don't be afraid to ask. You can ask online. You don't have to go to London or to San Francisco or Austin, Texas to get it. You can do it online, and with, I don't know, $40,000, you can produce a superb prototype, not only for a mobile game, and you can produce the whole game for that, but for console games or PC games. So you have to be a little bit aggressive.
That makes sense. So kind of, I'm interested in what you mentioned about funding through sort of international funding online. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, you just need to Google the organizations that will provide you with individual funding. Now, you have to be a little bit careful, because what might happen is if you produce a great game, then they might want to take share of the profits, and it might be too high a share. But there are any number of people in Europe and America that will provide funding for it on the basis that you don't hand over your franchise to them, but in the first game that you produce, there might be what's called revenue sharing for that particular game. I spoke to someone just 2 days ago. He's actually an immigrant from Eritrea. Absolutely brilliant, and that is exactly what he's done. Because he's so good, he's managed to get some of the bigger companies interested, and the bigger companies are looking for these new franchises and new IPs. You know, Call of Duty and GTA and Assassin's Creed, they're not going to go on forever, Louisa. In fact, I think that they're kind of plateauing now. So you need some new injection of creativity from from Russians, and Russia's a big place. You know, so it's 7 or 8 time zones, and some of the people are highly creative, and some of them just like to code. You know, but there is enormous opportunity to be able to do that. I can give you an example of one country that's done it, and that is Iran. Many Iranians now live legally in Los Angeles, but they are very good at cultural effects as well as good at coding. Most Iranians abroad tend to be dentists, but there are many video game developers in Los Angeles, for example.
Interesting.
Indeed, Sperasoft's headquarters is in California, and they went there so that they could get some ideas from the film industry.
This is sort of this is kind of what I was going to say next. Just in terms of thinking about Russia domestically as well as globally. I guess the industry seems to be at that particular tipping point where you can very easily get in on the ground floor of things, in the same way that we have, startups in the UK that will go from, a couple of people gathered around a laptop to multi-million corporations in the space of 6 years. It seems to me that that's sort of where the Russian market is at the moment, of this turning point where you will so easily go from a tester to a director of the studio. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. I think it's more of a tipping point than a turning. I think it's tipping upwards. And people, maybe not people in the audience, because they might be at, Moscow State University or something like that. But I know people from when I was at Sony, Louisa, who were testers in Liverpool. They now run a studio. Okay, it's 15 years later, but they are running a studio. That career path is, I don't say it's clear, but there is a career path. So you don't have to go into, coding the game, but you could go into actually doing a voiceover. You could be someone who runs a team who is doing localization for modern Chinese. And I've seen people do that. So they don't have to be all coders for the rest of their life. And producers, in the sense that they're not film producers, they're video game producers. They're doing the alpha, they're doing the beta. And they're changing the ways of doing it. They're not using waterfall development. People in the audience will know what waterfall is, but they've moved to agile. And agile is good, But the Chinese have taken it a step further. Instead of having one team work on it, the Chinese tend to have a situation where they fail fast. So they put small teams, maybe 5 teams on it, to get the best possible franchise there that is appealing to the audience in China. And you can't just put all your money on one game. They will have 5 teams developing it. And it's rather like doing a hackathon, but it's on a much, much bigger scale. I'm not saying the Russians should do that, but they have the capability to be able to do that and be a little bit more agile in their development.
Thank you. Okay, that's fantastic. So I just wanted to this is a bit of a left turn, sorry,
All right.
rather than directly following on from the last question. But I think obviously we've talked quite a lot about Russia. And obviously a large portion of our audience today will be Russian. So I guess, you know, as in the spirit of the exchange element of the PlayUK program, I thought maybe we could talk a little bit more about the games industry in the UK. So first of all, I just wanted to ask you why the UK is a great place to make games. I mean, obviously we have the creative element, we have the I mean, my instinct as well is when you were talking about ecosystems, my instinct is that everywhere's so packed together in the UK. There's so many people here in terms of physical space. You know, the Guildford and Leamington Spa are not even that far away from each other, really. So yeah, the idea of ecosystems is really fascinating, and I wondered if maybe you could talk a bit more about that.
Yes, you know, on the south coast of England, there is a town called Brighton, and there's at least 15 game studios there. And why is it Brighton? It is because it's a laid-back place, and people are able to either come into a studio and exchange ideas, or for 3 of the 5 days a week or 3 of the 7 days a week, they can work from home, having got those ideas internally. And England tends to be, well, the UK tends to be a place which is very, very social, and there's a lot of sharing of ideas. I don't think that eventually everyone will be working from home in the video game industry, because you need that stimulation of looking at somebody else's screen and helping them with it, or going to the lady next door and saying, can you help me with this? Can you draw me a character that I can use? So you need that.
It's water cooler moments.
Louisa. Sorry?
I believe it's Google. Is it Google that calls them? Oh no, water cooler moments are different. They're to do with TV, but I know that Google, for instance, plans routes in their offices. The offices are often planned to create moments of interaction, where these kinds of ideas, where people can, as you say, share, where you're walking to get a coffee and you will run into a coworker and you will have a conversation about what you're working on, and then if ideas will develop from there. I think is the ethos behind a lot of kind of open plan office design.
And maybe also, Louisa, I could mention something which I suppose to some extent in some countries it's controversial, but it's diversity. Is that if you, maybe 20 years ago, if you went to the studio, in Nottingham for a particular, which is a town in England where there is a kind of a game industry, it would be 25 to 35-year-old men, and largely they would be from the UK. This is not the case now. If you go to Leamington Spa or you go to Guildford, it's a complete diverse situation of Africans, Indians, and people from countries like Russia, Ukraine especially, Canada, South America even. And what you do by putting these people together, you're stimulating each other with so many different ideas. It's not a coincidence that the CEOs of the top companies, tech companies, probably in the US now, are from Southeast Asia, for example. Now, I'm not saying you don't get that in Russia, but what I'm saying is that diversity, and you asked me about the UK games industry, you definitely get that ethnic diversity, and you get the male, female diversity as well. And it's amazing how much more creative you can be when you have that community.
So speaking of sort of going back to the question we had moments ago about the ecosystem of a studio space, Anna again has asked she's asked how, or they have asked, how do you think the virtual space can replace office work, and mentioned that Facebook is actively developing a meta universe for work opportunities now. Do you think that would help for game studios? Do you think that would be an adequate replacement? I mean, we won't spend too much time on this because it's only partly to do with you know, games developers in the UK. But yeah, I wondered what your thoughts were on that, just very quickly.
Well, there are companies like Facebook and Google have enough money to be able to experiment, to find out where are people most creative, where are people most productive. And I think that the early results said it depends actually on the person. If you are a mother with 2 children, but you are a brilliant coder in Unity, you're probably going to be happy at home working on that. If you're a young guy, 25, 26, and you like to go down the pub, then you probably want to work in a studio where there are people like-minded. And so the human resources or the talent managers need to be able to put them together. And some companies have been very successful in that. I was talking to Sam, your colleague, before you came on, and I do a lot of mentoring, and I mentored Roll7. You may not have heard them, Louisa, but they've recently been bought by Take-Two.
Yes.
And they pioneered a lot of the virtual working, because they could say to someone, well, look, we don't need you this week. You can work for that person, but you have to sign a contract to say next week you will work for us, so you can make virtual working work. Can you make it in the metaverse? I'm not so sure. I think that you will need some of these open plan offices where you can move around, but you need to have money to be able to have these offices, and you can't do it in London. You might be able to do it in Bognor Regis or something like that in the south coast of England. Yeah?
Somewhere where there's more space.
That's why Brighton was, the real estate, the old hotels where the gamers could move into. Leamington Spa, which I've been to many times, and Warwick as well. They have a lot of these old buildings, and they've been refitted out by Warwickshire County Council such that the video game developers want to go in there, because they are, it's not just sitting in a modern office block, that they're able to have a big room, but also have smaller rooms for specialist developers.
There's another thing I wanted to ask as well, just off the back of that, which is just thinking about the future. Obviously, we're talking about the future of remote working, but where do you see the games industry in the UK going in the next 3 to 5 years? Because we've talked about how the Russian market can and potentially will develop, but where do you think the future of the UK is for games?
I think for the next 5 years that, with PlayStation 5 and with Xbox Series X, and Nintendo Switch, you're probably not going to see too much change until the next cycle. But my personal belief is that the heavy hitters, how can I express that for the translator? The big guys like Google and Amazon and Facebook,
The heavyweights.
the heavyweights will actually transform the industry such that you don't always need to have a console. You know, you can just have the screen. It's not built into the TV, but it's built into for the downloading or the streaming. The reason I say it will take time is because of this, and if the scientists in the audience will understand this, it's to do with the speed of light, Louisa, in that and it's to do with something, if I become technical, it's called codec, which is compression, decompression, which means that you're sending code down a line and you're sending code up a line. What you send down is fast, what you send up is slow. So that latency, that means how long it takes you to kill your opponent in the video game, means that you're not going to win that game. So until that latency problem is solved on streaming, and you can get close to it if you get server farms, or which is really where the cloud is in these farms, until you can solve that, you're not going to actually transform the industry. I think Google are a little bit behind at the moment, but I think Google will, but also in the UK, because you wanted to talk about the UK, I think that they will experiment in the UK. Amazon are already, Facebook have been quite successful. And what you will see is that, which is good for the industry, it's not just Sony, Microsoft, it's going to be the other people in there, so that consumers have a far wider choice of what they want to do. And it's almost like, you know, you go online and say, I want to play that, and I'll play that. Now, what you've got to sort out are other things like payment methods. You know, how do I pay for it? Now, you do it on a mobile phone. Yes, you can do it on a mobile phone. Can you do it for console and PC gaming? It's a little bit more tricky at the moment, and you've got to have secure ways of being able to do that. That's another thing that the Russians are very good at, is cybersecurity. I say cybersecurity, I don't say the bad side of it, but the good side of it. They are really good at that. And that is what's going to be needed in the future in the games industry when streaming becomes very, very popular.
Well, mobile also seems to be taking over the games industry, but also I think it's kind of paradoxically, screen sizes are now growing on mobile. So I also wondered, I mean, kind of speaking globally now, moving away from the UK, do you think mobile is also the future of global games, and how will it progress, do you think?
I would say two things here. One, which is not so positive, Louisa, and that is there used to be 1,000 games a week in China, new mobile games. Mobile games industry is extremely competitive. You've got to be absolutely brilliant or lucky or great marketing to get your mobile game to be a real success. Whereas in PC and console gaming, if you think about it, with your franchise, you can actually win. So, but it's a harder route, but there's a greater chance. Mobile gaming is extremely competitive, but in Indonesia and India, yes, the screens are getting bigger. If I was to predict, and this is relevant to Russia, in about 2003, there was a console called PlayStation Portable. It was succeeded by PlayStation Vita. It became a super hit in Russia, simply because it was sold alongside mobile game devices. Sorry, well, not mobile game, by handsets in a chain called Eldorado. I think they're called M-Video now, I'm not sure. And the distribution was fantastic. So people
Louis, can you ask what was in the bundle? I didn't understand it clearly.
A bigger mobile phone called a PSP, and it was a really big hit.
Sorry, David, just to interrupt
David,
you slightly.
What was in the bundle? What was the PSP Vita sold with? It was sold with something. That's what David said. What was that?
So just our translator has asked what was sold with the PSP bundle, with the the Vita. What was sold in the bundle with it? He didn't quite catch that.
Right, okay. Eldorado, or M-Video, is a chain of stores in Russia, and the Russian audience will know that, yeah. And they were marketing. They weren't smartphones then. They were the Nokias or Sony, flip-top phones and things like that. And they were selling contracts, just as we do in the UK. But they had a fantastic distribution system. So what we did with Sony was we said, we have a PlayStation Portable. Why don't you sell the PlayStation Portable alongside your handset? Because you will see that the PlayStation Portable has a better screen, it has better games than you could get through the telecoms. And it became very, very successful in that way because of the distribution system. So I do think that people like Samsung, Sony, Huawei, and probably Apple will modify their handsets or their smartphones such that you do get a bigger screen. I don't think it's going to be as big as a laptop screen or an iPad, but I think that people, once they play the game, if they have it in a bigger one and they can perhaps fold it and put it in their pocket, then that would absolutely be ideal. But I do have to say a cautionary note, and that is that in the next 2 to 3 years, because of the chip shortage, you're not going to see that immediately. Not that change, but eventually, I think you will see it. I think the other thing that you'll see is that VR is in its infancy. VR is virtual reality for the translator. I'm sure he knows. And there's AR as well, which is augmented reality. In military applications, VR is done just by having a flip down on one eye. And so you can see, if you're trained, you can actually see what you're doing in VR, and you don't necessarily have to have one of these ugly headsets on. And so I think that the development in miniaturized VR will also create a revolution, not in 5 years, but maybe 7 to 10 years. And I think that is going to be that is going to be one of the next big things.
So
I'm conscious, Louise, that there seems to be a lot of people in the chat, and I'm not clicking on that. I'm relying on you.
Don't worry. I'm fielding the questions.
I've just wondered for the last
getting.
20 minutes if there were any questions.
No, don't worry. It's mostly been Anna who's been asking questions, and I've been fielding those back to you. Don't worry about that.
Right.
I wondered, in fact, if obviously we've talked quite a lot about the past, and we've talked a lot about Russia, and we've talked a lot about the future. But now I thought maybe we could talk more about you. So obviously you're on the board of Keywords, and Keywords have built a great games empire. So with amazing developers and PR service providers, audio, graphics. So what's next for Keywords? Sorry, I knew you said Keyworks.
I think that it's well known is that we will probably look at what we call adjacent markets. In that a lot of the work that we've done for video games, be it translation or localization or artwork, is equally possible for whether it's Netflix or Warner Brothers or Disney. And there are so many parallels where a lot of the post-production or a lot of the services, testing can be done outside to high quality, but outsource it. And I think what you're going to see is, I think keywords will develop in that area. It's public knowledge anyway that, you know, that's one area that we will probably go into. But I'm not here to sell keywords, Louisa. But I know that they do have some. They do have 2 or 3 offices in Russia and also in Poland, but as well as in the UK. Yeah.
Well, so I mean, I know you're not here to sell keywords, but I will still ask you a few more questions about yourself at least.
All right.
Because obviously this is a series of inspirational games industry figures. These are inspirational talks, and I wondered who inspires you, both in and out of the games industry. Who is inspiring to you?
Well, I think that one of them you've had on before, which was Ian Livingstone, and you had Peter Molyneux. Peter, both of those are absolutely geniuses in terms of what they develop. But in recent weeks, I have been inspired by doing a Zoom call with this young guy called Salman from Eritrea, who immediately came up. And bear in mind, I'm over 70, Louisa, and he's what, 22, 23. And immediately he put on my screen the URL for these games. He said, David, this is what I've been developing. Click on there, click on there. And it was like a light bulb, Louisa. It was just amazing. Some of the things that he had done in 3 to 4 days that would have taken other people 3 to 4 weeks. So in recent times, I would say that he is completely inspirational. In the Middle East, I've seen people, and I'll go back to the traditional people in a minute, but I've seen people in the Middle East and Turkey develop video games based around immigration, based around war. And video games is not all entertainment. There is an aspect called serious games. And I've seen people as far away as Abu Dhabi, Amman in Jordan, Cairo, but also in Coventry University, who've really inspired me in terms of what you can do with a video game. So you can actually simulate immigrants crossing across from North Africa. And if they go in this direction, if current is this, how will they move? How can we help them? So that's inspirational. In the past, I would say that the person that inspired me most was the father of PlayStation, Ken Kutaragi, because I used to have, as president of PlayStation, I used to have one-to-one sessions with him when I was in Tokyo. And he would take me on this journey, Louisa, from where we were with, say, PlayStation 2. And he was already thinking about PlayStation 6 and PlayStation 7, 20 years ahead.
Actually, yeah.
What he could do with it. You know?
I feel like when we had a preliminary meeting about this talk, you told an anecdote about him and the launch of PSP in Europe. What was that?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you about it. But we were going to launch PlayStation Portable, which is I've got one upstairs. I should have brought it down, shouldn't I? But it's a screen, and the game goes in, and but what Ken wanted to do was to put headphones in and built-in earphones, so you could put them in your ears to play PlayStation Portable. But I had to get it approved through the EU in Brussels. And we took it there, and it failed. It failed because the sound coming out was too high, greater than 60 decibels. And it would harm, if a child got hold of it, it would harm their ears. And so when I went to Tokyo, I said, I had to say to Ken, I said, I'm sorry, you can't launch in 4 months' time because EU have refused it. So Ken said to me, he said, David, not good enough, not good enough. You have to go to the parliament in Brussels and tell them that Ken Kutaragi said that we have to launch this PlayStation Portable. And it's as good as the PlayStation. I said, Ken, I can't do that. He said, okay, then you're fired. You're fired. So I said, but I have a solution, Ken. I said, the solution is all you need to do is just to sell the earbuds separately, and you can label it, for what this one will be okay for adults, but this one is for children, and you can market them and sell more. He said, no. He said, I want it built into the PlayStation. This was in the morning. So in the afternoon, he called me back and he said, you're still fired. I said, well, okay, I get that, Ken. I've been fired before for smaller things. So he said, but I've solved it, David. Oh, okay, all right. So what are we going to do, Ken? And he said, in the last 6 hours from morning to afternoon, he said, I've got my engineers to mock up this PlayStation, or this PlayStation Portable, and he had it there, and it didn't have a built-in earbud. He said, I'm going to market them separately. That's how we're going to do it. And I said to him in Japanese, it's the same solution, Ken, that I proposed. No, David. You told me that this morning. He said, this is an afternoon solution. Afternoon solutions are much cleverer. He said, that's what we're going to do. So I said, well, do I have to go to Brussels now? He said, no, it's okay. You don't have to go to Brussels. And you're not fired. He said, it's okay. He said, David, I've solved it. I've saved your life. And this is how Ken was. He was a genius, but he had these little frailties as well. But so we launched it.
Yeah, and it paid off, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, which did you prefer working at, PlayStation or Capcom?
I really enjoyed them both. Capcom is still run by someone called Sujimoto-san, and he rules the roost there, but he's also very, very creative. I learned so much about how he managed his studios, the software side of managing the studio for Monster Hunter in particular, and that he had near the headquarters in Osaka dormitories, and he still does. But these dormitories were like hotels. They were just fantastic places to work. He really looked, and he still looks after his people to be able to develop it. So I really enjoyed working at Capcom, and I learned so much from them in the in the time that I was there. I also had some really pleasant moments in Moscow with Capcom as well. And I shouldn't tell you these because they're too close to the bone, but the Capcom distributor liked to go to the girly bars in Moscow. I wasn't terribly into that, but they said, no, David, you have to come with us. You have to come with
right.
us. They want to see foreigners.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and these girls, they will play video games with you. I said, well, okay, all right. And they did, and they were very good.
Wow.
It wasn't, anyway,
didn't expect the story to end that way. Okay, fantastic. I'll move on from there, I think.
Oh, yeah, I would do, yeah.
Is there anyone on your bucket list to meet, say, who you haven't met before? Like, is there anybody who you think is inspirational who you haven't met, who you'd love to meet and talk with and pick the brain of?
The people I wanted to see were on the Apollo program, and I never got to meet Buzz Aldrin, so that would be nice. And I think, particularly in the space industry, there are so many really, really earth-shattering developments that I could name the people, but probably the audience wouldn't know them. But it's nice to be able to talk to them about what they're thinking 5 years hence and how technically they're going to solve these problems. So basically, I'm probably still, Louisa, I'm probably still an astrophysicist at heart. I think the other thing is that what I find inspiring is surgical interventions, operations, and things like that. And on the occasions that I've had to be able to talk to these people, that is a totally different skill. You know, with a video game, you're there with your head forward and you're playing the game. But these people, they're sewing on, you know, in a micro way, buttons inside these people, and that I really admire those people. Yeah,
That's interesting. And it's sort of, well, I mean, obviously we don't have a great deal of time left, in fact. But I think I wanted to quickly pick up on, you've mentioned both games to kind of create immigration modeling, but also your interest there in kind of surgical procedures. Obviously, game technology and game engines have been used to kind of create simulations to practice, right? So do you think that that's, I don't know, is that something that interests you, the kind of application of video game technology to other areas that can be, yeah, I wondered if you could say a few words about that.
well, the surgical applications are already well advanced, Louisa, that when you do an appendectomy, that means taking out the appendicitis, there are appendix, sorry, taking out the appendix. There are different ways to do it. And that when you use a video game or a video inspired piece of engineering to do it, you can actually see, and this happens now, and they train doctors, especially surgeons, what happens if I cut that? All the blood comes out, right? Yeah. So you don't cut that. You go down and you look for another opening in a different way. It's no different from a video game because you can actually see the result and you can practice on it. Shell and BP have used it for people to escape from platforms, oil platforms as well. But the surgical side is actually quite brilliant. The other side, which I would just mention, which is probably about, it was a game with a PSP, is that autistic children will be a lot of them, not all of them, be very good at playing mobile devices. And I saw one autistic child who was non-verbal, which means that they can't speak, become so excited about playing a PSP, and this was in a school in Kent, and was when I was with Sony, that you could actually see, and this person, this child who was about 8 or 9, actually was saying a few words. I couldn't understand it, but it developed. And since then, I'm now a trustee for the National Autistic Society, and I do help them look at devices that can help two things. One, help autistic children develop their skills. I mean, in the end, they won't give back the PSP, I mean, or the mobile device because they want to play it. But not only that, but autistic children and adults, you need to find a vocation for them. And they are absolutely brilliant at coding. They're also very good at drawing, and they're very good at finding bugs in programs. So what gives me a lot of inspiration is seeing them being able to develop into a career that they really, really love. And honestly, I've seen that, Louisa, and it's something that, you know, just warms the cockles of your heart.
Yeah, that's really fantastic.
When you see a child being able to do that, and sometimes they can find things that not other children, other young people simply cannot find. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of why I think a lot of people are moving away from, because there are ways of thinking within kind of neurodivergence that are brilliant, and like, you know, and different to the way, you know, everybody, you know, different minds work in different ways, and that's definitely really interesting. Yeah, so we have about 3 minutes now for from the end. So yeah, I just wondered if there were any closing remarks you wanted to leave people with, anything to think about, to ponder, drop in something about NFTs, you know, the big buzzword. What are your, you've got a big stage. What's your final
I have to
remarks?
say that, you know, with people within keywords, you know, we're not sure about NFTs and cryptocurrency and things like that, whether that should be developed, whether it's an area that we should go into. But I think that in 20 years' time, we'll all be playing with those. I'm absolutely certain. But I will end by saying this: is that this is a concept. We've got three daughters. You get to a point, and it's the same with people in a video game studio, and possibly yourself and other people, where you are able always to be a little bit ahead, but you reach a point, a tipping point, where your youngest daughter is far more adept at getting the right app on your iPhone and being able to play that video game. And the true tipping point with your children is when they are better at the video game than you. So it happened a long time ago to me when I was playing Ridge Racer, which is from Namco Bandai. But video games are a good marker of when you should listen to your children or grandchildren, and rather than them listen to you. I have learned so much, Louisa, from people in studios, just listening to them and watching them explain something on a screen, that my head, you know, is almost aching afterwards. That's absolutely brilliant. How did you do that? Oh, it's easy, David. Look, just like this, you know. So, and I have to say that I've learned a lot from, I know you've got a Russian audience, Russians as well. They are absolutely phenomenal, particularly in you know, in physics and nuclear physics and things like that. Maybe it's the genetic, but maybe that's how they're brought up. I don't know. But,
I think it's probably it's probably cultural for sure. These things tend to be based on how we're taught in school and what we do when we're children.
but there aren't many comedians in
argument.
Russia, Louisa, like yourself. So
Do you know, I actually have a friend who is a Russian stand-up comedian. Yeah, that's, I mean, well, we are bang on 5:30.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't if you
Well, I
have
hope you've enjoyed it. I don't know who's been in the audience, but
I think it's been inspirational. And I think it's been a fantastic close to the series for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Louisa, and everybody there. And I've enjoyed it. And let's hope we can do another one. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today, David.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye then.